Obviously, my update here is based on early reports, and we reserve the right to amend and adjust as necessary as we gather more information. The word fog of war was invented for a situation like this. This is a fluid situation. We will consult with the Israelis on next steps in terms of the response and how to deal with what Iran has just done, and we will continue to monitor for further threats and attacks from Iran and its proxies. We are particularly focused on protecting U.S. service members in the region. And with that, I'll take just a few questions. Yeah.
Thanks, Jake. Is the administration making any preparations to evacuate U.S. citizens from Lebanon or elsewhere in the region?
We have been very clear for some time now that U.S. citizens should avail themselves of commercial means to depart Lebanon, given everything that's going on. We have said that from this podium, from multiple podiums. We continue to say that, but we have not begun triggering a non-combatant emergency evacuation, a NEO, and do not have an intention to do so at this time. If that changes, we'll let you know. But we continue to reinforce the point: American citizens in Lebanon should follow the guidance from the State Department, which is to find civilian commercial means to depart, because in extremis, we may not be able to get them out safely. Yes.
Thanks, Jake. What is the U.S. view on whether Israel should retaliate, and what is your concern about this leading to a wider escalation of war in the region?
We've had some initial discussions with the Israelis in the aftermath of this at the military level and also at the White House to Prime Minister's office level. We'll continue those conversations in the hours ahead. I'm not going to prejudge or get ahead of anything. We want to have some deep consultations with the Israelis, and I'll have more to report to you after we get the opportunity for deeper discussions.
And escalation in the region?
Obviously, this is a significant escalation by Iran, a significant event, and it is equally significant that we were able to step up with Israel and create a situation in which no one was killed in this attack in Israel, so far as we know at this time. We are now going to look at what the appropriate next steps are to secure, first and foremost, American interests, and then to promote stability to the maximum extent possible as we go forward. Yeah.
Back in April, the president's message to Israel was to take the win when the U.S. and Israel were able to intercept the barrage of Iranian missiles. Is he recommending a similarly limited response this time?
I will not, from this podium, share the president's recommendations. He will have the opportunity to share them directly. We're going to have, as I said, ongoing consultations with the Israelis this afternoon, this evening. It is too early for me to tell you anything publicly in terms of our assessment or in terms of what our expectations are of the Israelis or the advice that we will give them.
So will he be speaking to Prime Minister Netanyahu today?
I don't have anything to announce from this podium, but I can tell you that he is tracking this minute by minute. We are very much deeply in touch with the Israelis, and insofar as we have calls to read out, we'll make sure to read them out with you. Just last question, then I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Jake. In April, after Iran struck Israel, the U.S. issued a number of sanctions as a consequence. This morning, the president said there would be severe consequences if Iran carried out this attack. What are those consequences, and are they more severe than sanctions?
Totally legitimate question, and that answer will come based on the conversations and consultations we have with our Israeli counterparts. It's too soon for me to stand before you today and give you an answer. What I can tell you is this. We are proud of the actions that we've taken alongside Israel to protect and defend Israel. We have made clear that there will be consequences, severe consequences for this attack, and we will work with Israel to make that the case. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you, Jake. Okay. On to the rest of the programming. Bye.
A lot of effort and attention and application of technology today devised a kind of a infrastructure plan. We have a word for it in our language. It's called Gati Shakti. It's like you're trying to speed up. It's a power of efficiency or speed in a way. The idea is really to try to assemble together all conceivable considerations which would go into infrastructure development, so that when you make that decision, it's not that you later on discover there was an environmental issue, or there was a political issue, or there was a geological issue, or there was a habitation issue. So how do you actually, and we've got close to about, I think, 2,000 different layers of input, which allows then for faster decision making where infrastructure is concerned, and that's actually beginning to have an impact on the ground, and I will give you some examples to tell you why. The fifth one relates to the digital public infrastructure and really applying the digital identity and for both for governance purposes as well for business purposes as well as for delivery of benefits and services. And here again, it's actually helped us in many ways to scale up, governance and delivery in a way in which it would have been inconceivable, and that's had a very positive impact on growth. And finally, the human resources side, where put very simply, I would say the educational institutions of India have actually literally doubled in capacity in the last 10 years. I mean, if you were to look at the number of universities, the number of colleges, the number of technical institutions, the number of schools, they are roughly 2 to 2.5x from where they stood in 2014, which in absolute numbers, if I were to take colleges, for example, means creating 2 new colleges a day. Now, the result of all of this, if I were to give it to you numbers, today infrastructure, for example, for a country where this has long been our problem, we are building about 27, 28 kilometers of highway a day. On railways, which is so critical for our movement, and many of you come from industries which recognize its importance. For us, railways has actually in the past impacted logistics, impacted energy. We had an energy crisis because we had actually a railway wagon crisis at one point of time. Today, that same sector, we are building 12 to 14 kilometers of railway track a day. Similarly, if you look at aviation, where in contrast to many other parts of the world, our aviation, I'm happy to say, is doing very well. In fact, the current challenge we have is that there are about 1,000 new aircraft on order and they're not coming in as fast as we would like. But in terms of the infrastructure, again, on average in the last decade, we've built 7.5 new airports a year. So there are 75 new airports which have been added on in the last 10 years. Similarly, I spoke about the digitization of the country. Of the most, the most common example of it are the transactions, the micro transactions you see. Even street vendors today, do their payments. They prefer QR code to returning the change for your larger note. And just the volume of the transactions is interesting because it shows a society ready to embrace digitization. So even if the transactions are small, I mean, we still do on average about 11 to 12 billion transactions a month, which is, I mean, easily about 2-3 times what the next one I think after us is Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. But the US does about 4.5, I think, a year. But I cite that not so much for the volumes. I admit, that our volumes are small, but it shows the society's readiness to embrace digital medium. And if today we can confidently say that we are a 8% growth rate economy with a few decades of that kind of growth rate ahead of us. Now, other than throwing those numbers at you, there's a reason why I'm saying that. Because that kind of growth rate will require a different kind of resources. That it's not a growth rate which can be fueled by the current quality of relationships and the current volume of our trading with the world. So in our growth, and this growth is really a very, very broad-based growth. I mean, you can see it in the FMCG demand, in the tech durable demand, expectation of, I mean, we're looking at the steel sector, for steel demand growing by 9 to 10% a year. Given all of this, we are actually, for us, those partners who have the natural complementarity to support this growth or to partner this growth. I think they have a certain special importance in our eyes, and certainly I think you would agree that Australia qualifies to be one of them. Now, in terms of foreign policy itself, as I said, we think of it increasingly as purposed for accelerating this growth and development that I'm speaking about. In foreign policy, our objective is today to promote greater investments, to seek technology, joint ventures, best practices. In fact, as I said, the CEO Forum report was something that we looked at. I spoke to Minister Goyal yesterday when I was on my way to Sydney, and certainly, our intention is to look at this and use it as a base for further conversation and discussions. Now, having spoken about India, I am the foreign minister, so it would be remiss of me not to speak a little bit about the world. As you say, I do believe something happened yesterday.
Just a small thing.
Yes. I think there are probably, to my mind, 4 or 5 important consequences for the relationship and for the business aspect of the relationship. One, there was already a reordering of supply chains which was taking place. It is very likely that in view of the election results yesterday in the US, that this would accelerate. I'd be very candid with you. I mean, some of it would certainly be somewhat disruptive, but we in India perceive it as an opportunity, because having kind of missed the manufacturing bus in the 1990s, early 2000s, we do think that this reordering of supply chain gives us a sort of second bite of the apple, and maybe this time around, starting with Apple, we are doing better than we were doing earlier. The second, there will be, in a way, more geopolitical hedging. What will inevitably happen as a consequence of policies which we can, at least those parts of it we can safely predict, will be many more of us would be seeking more relationships to keep life stable. The third pertains to the digital side, and the digital side now pretty much covers everything. And what has happened, what has been happening and will continue to intensify is issues about in a way of trust and what accompanies the digital aspect of a product or a service or a technology, I think will come under greater scrutiny. And it will reflect itself in different fields. I mean, you've seen that already in semiconductors, where there's a very conscious attempt at diversification of production, and the drive towards AI will further accelerate this. Digital payment platforms, for example, would become, in a sense, more valuable, but also, which platform to use with whom becomes an important question. A fourth one, to my mind, is mobility of talent and skills, because even as there is a re-globalization or reworking of the current architecture, apart from the technology changes, I think the demographic unevenness of the world is beginning to bite us. That there would be economies where the demand would be high, the talents may not be plentiful, It could be different in other places. And what will happen, in a sense, is already happening. And I can, give you some very interesting numbers here. Is we will be moving, my guess is perhaps in the next few years, to a much more integrated global workplace. That many countries, and it'll be, to my mind, even a United States under Donald Trump, will make a distinction in immigration and mobility. That for them, economically justified mobility will have to be fostered, while those where the economic value is less or negative will have to be managed. So this is going to be, in fact, I tell my colleagues in foreign policy, I actually think for us, at least in India, it's going to be one of the top 3 priorities. That how do you create and manage and optimize a global workplace? Now the global workplace doesn't mean that the talent alone has to move. Businesses can move as well. We've already seen in the last few years, right now by the last count, we have about 1,800 global capability centers in India, which between them generate about $150 billion worth of exports. So we see this trend intensifying, because the more technology-driven, more digital era is going to require a certain concentration and access to skills and talent. So whether the talent goes to the business or the business goes to the talent, that's a decision which corporates will be making. And finally, we do think that, again, politics notwithstanding, the world will be greener. That while the pace of the greening of the economy may vary, definitely, if one looks today, we are certainly taking a big bet on green hydrogen, on green ammonia. We are thinking of green shipping corridors. Electric mobility is already upon us. We are looking at biodiesel. In fact, that's something we are pushing very strongly at sustainable aviation fuel. So that whole world is green steel. These are going to come. Politics or no politics, it may come faster, it may come in some countries more than other countries, but it will actually not stop as a global trend. So these, to my mind, would be the geopolitical factors we have to contend with, and which our relationship. Now we can either sit back and watch it, resist it in some cases, or leverage it in many cases. That choice is up to us. We as relationship managers, all of you as enterprises with a stake in it. So that's the broad picture. One last word. As I said, it helps when you are re-elected. It helps even more when you're re-elected twice. So we've got off to a fast start. We've done less than 150 days of the third term. But even in this period, we have made we've taken some very big calls. Among the calls which might be of interest to you, one is to set up 12 major industrial zones across India with a view to attracting global manufacturing and promoting domestic manufacturing. Secondly, to double down on the infrastructure spending, because the infrastructure investments are still primarily driven by government spending. So we will continue to do that, and we hope to see a greater private sector involvement there. And we intend to connect that to the zones in question. 3, a big focus on human resources development, on skills. We are encouraging corporates to do more internship. There's a kind of a Prime Minister's internship scheme which we have announced for prepare for promote stronger rural growth, because again, historically that's been the laggard sector. That's changing now. So as the agrarian economy really sort of gets better value for its production, we are seeing actually the gaps between industrial growth and rural growth narrow in comparison to the past. And finally, as I said, prepare for this different world which we are looking at, a world of AI, a world of EV, a world of really greener services and greener products. So that's really the picture which I want to present to you. I'd be very happy to listen to any comments you have, any suggestions, any problems. And I do say this, if you have problems, we would frankly like to hear from you, maybe in front of others, but maybe not. Maybe you want to tell us separately. My own experience with many other relationships, and I myself earlier on been servicing CEO forums with some countries, is probably the best thing which can happen is if you give us a specific problem and we solve it for you, and then word travels, that might actually do more to enhance our credibility and effectiveness than any speech that I can give. So you have an invitation. I won't be solving it, but I will certainly be passing it on to the people. And you know, one of the good things about not having a direct jurisdiction is you can pretty much sort of poke your nose into everybody else's business, which I'm quite given to do. So thank you again, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Ladies and gentlemen, namaste and welcome to all the distinguished guests at the Institute, both those here in our beautiful headquarters at 31 Bligh Street and those joining us online for this special event and address and a conversation with India's Minister of External Affairs, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar. I'm Michael Fullilove, the Executive Director of the Lowy Institute. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great personal pleasure to host my friend Dr. Jaishankar at the Institute this evening. He and I were introduced more than a decade ago by his son Dhruva, who was a colleague of mine at the Brookings Institution in Washington, DC in the late noughties. And Dhruva has been a non-resident fellow here at the Institute for some years. He's doing a fabulous job in Washington, of course, running ORF America. This year, Jai, I couldn't be at the Raisina dialogue, but Samir Saran and Dhruva were kind enough to invite me to participate in Raisina DC at a panel with Michelle Flournoy and Senator Bill Haggerty and Meera Raphoopa from the National Security Council that was beamed into Raisina, and I was grateful for that courtesy. Ladies and gentlemen, I've known and admired Jai for more than a decade, and in that period I've called on him in Beijing and Washington, where he was representing the Republic of India. I've called on him in Delhi when he was heading up India's Foreign Service as Foreign Secretary, and now, of course, we're delighted to host him as the Minister. He spoke actually virtually at the Institute in 2020 during the pandemic. And last year, he was kind enough to invite me to give the Atal Bihari Vajpayee lecture, which was a great honour. Dr. Jaishankar and I are both great cricket fans, and today he's had a big day. He went up in a chopper, he inspected a lot of ADF assets, and he was at the SCG where he was personally escorted by Steve Waugh. So let me say, Jai, I am fully aware that I'm playing second fiddle today. But I have always thought that the game of cricket is a lot like the great game of foreign affairs. Things are opaque in cricket as in diplomacy. Sometimes a draw is actually a win. The weather conditions and the state of the pitch are critical. The ball swings in the air and it jumps off the pitch. Sometimes it flies at your head. And in foreign policy too, the decision-making environment is fast and fluid. And that's certainly the case today. It seems to me the relationship between New Delhi and Canberra in a way has the character of a long Steve Waugh innings, if you'll allow me, Minister. We started off slowly, we dug in, we got our eye in, but now that we've settled in, we're taking our shots and the runs are flowing. I might say I wish they had been flowing a little more in Australia's direction during the recent T20 series. Australia has many things that bind us together. We have deep historical and personal connections. There is a brilliant and talented Indian diaspora in this country. But increasingly, we also have a shared view of the world. Through organisations such as the Quad, Australia and India are demonstrating the shared conviction that all countries should have the right to make their own way in the world free of coercion. No country should be forced to live in another's shadow. So our worldviews are coming closer. Our bilateral cooperation is also growing. In 2020, we set up the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. In April this year, we signed the India-Australia Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. We've increased the pace of military exercises. There are also some welcome positive signs on the economic front with an uptick in two-way trade last year. Many of us still feel that the private sector has been a bit slow to catch up with these developments, but I'm sure that with visits like this by the Minister and the work of people such as Ashok Jacob, those things will also speed up. Working together, I really believe that countries such as Australia and India have the wherewithal to help shape Asia's future. But first, we need to believe in ourselves and in each other. Ladies and gentlemen, the former US Ambassador to India, Richard Verma, described Dr. Jaishankar as one of the world's best diplomats, and I agree. Dr. Jaishankar was born into a distinguished family of high achievers. He is a graduate of St. Stephen's College at the University of Delhi, and he earned his doctorate from Jawaharlal Nehru University, specialising in nuclear diplomacy, which is probably useful at the moment. He joined the Foreign Service in 1977. He served in capitals such as Moscow and Tokyo. He was ambassador or high commissioner in Prague, Singapore, Beijing, and Washington. He also held a number of important posts in India, culminating in his appointment as Foreign Secretary. After retiring from the Foreign Service in 2018, Dr. Jaishankar joined Tata Sons. But following the 2019 election, Prime Minister Modi appointed him Minister of External Affairs, the first Foreign Secretary, I think, to occupy room 172 in South Block. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming India's Minister for External Affairs, His Excellency, Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar. Jai.
Good evening. Dr. Michael Fulilov, High Commissioner, dear friends. Let me begin by emphasizing what a great pleasure it is to be back here. I've been here physically once before and virtually a few times. And I'm here really at the tail end of a visit to Australia, my second as a foreign minister this year, which I think in itself is a bit of a statement about the relationship. I also come here after not just a great day at the SCG, but after also a splendid day in Canberra. I had very good conversations with Foreign Minister Penny Wong, with DPM and Defence Minister Richard Marles, with the Education Minister Justin Clare. Spent some time with the Australian Defence Forces. but of course, nothing tops Steve Waugh. Now, I think perhaps, Michael, we've once discussed the idea of writing a serious book on diplomacy, which is disguised as a serious book on cricket. Because there are actually, they're both very competitive occupations. And there's a lot really that one can learn from any kind of competition if you were to transpose its lessons to a different domain. And in fact, when I was walking around with Steve Waugh, and a lot of his conversations were about him and Sachin Tendulkar, it did strike me that he'd be kind of a useful guy to have around with you when you are strategizing, when you're looking at a difficult world, at trying to read bowlers and pitches, and as he was actually telling me what a difference having support from the crowd does. So there were some interesting and instructive observations there. But let me come back to really the serious business, the India-Australia relationship, which has been the focus of my visit. I am the 6th minister of the Modi government to visit Australia this year, after the Labour government has come into power. And that in itself should tell you something about the seriousness with which we approach this relationship. During this period, of course, we've had the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister visit India, two a Premier and a Deputy Premier from Australia as well. We've had a Chief of Naval Staff from India. We've had two significant military exercises in which India has participated. And I cite all those examples to you as a sign of this changing relationship that we speak about. Now, what has led us to discover or rediscover each other more profoundly than before? I think it's a combination of factors. Some of it are the changes in our own societies. Some of it are broadening interests as we have both become more globalized. And in India's case, as we have started to look and act eastwards in the last quarter century. And some part of it, I think, is also an outcome of the larger geopolitical changes in the world. Changes which directly impact the region, of which India is on one side and Australia at the other end of the periphery. Now, my sense today is, given the interest we have, given the relevance that we have for each other's strategy and calculations, I clearly have the confidence that this relationship is going to pick up steam very, very rapidly. We passed one milestone with the conclusion earlier this year of a free trade agreement, which is currently under the process of ratification. It also included some changes in business practices, which would make it much easier for our companies to work with each other. This is in the domain of tax. I have seen a great deal of interest in Australia about enhancing the quality and the scale of the education interface between us. And when I look at other businesses which would be natural to Australia, minerals, energy, agriculture, I think there are possibilities here. And the 6 ministers who came, the 5 apart from me, a lot of their attention were actually devoted to exploring these opportunities in the relationship. Having said that, I would like to place this relationship in the larger context of global politics. I think in an immediate sense, we are grappling with what I would call a 3C challenge, which is COVID, conflict, and climate change. I think these are the 3 big issues which have disrupted world politics, disrupted the world economy. And in many ways, I think they frame the larger context in which India and Australia discuss world politics. But preceding those, or certainly preceding the Ukraine conflict and the COVID, are the longer term changes which have been unfolding really over multiple decades. Changes which perhaps had one big inflection point in the global financial crisis of 2008. The fact that we are looking at a much broader distribution of power and influence in the world. That conversations and decisions are no longer as narrow as they used to be. I would say the global rebalancing in many ways is a even bigger picture in which we need to look at the relationship. So for me, whether it's the accumulated bilateral relationship or the geopolitical changes or the big global issues of the day, I think all of this in a way has been distilled into the emergence or the re-emergence of the Quad. I would argue that one of the reasons why the Quad worked in 2017 and subsequently, as opposed to the first attempt at it in 2007, a decade earlier, was the fact that India's relationship, bilateral relationships with the other 3 Quad partners had developed sufficiently by 2017 for us to actually take this initiative forward in a manner in which perhaps we couldn't do a decade earlier. And in that, if you look at it chronologically, and I've had the privilege of being associated with all these relationships, I would say the India-US had changed in the most dramatic and perhaps in the most profound manner. India-Japan evolved much more steadily, but the relationship which really had to play catch-up was the one between India and Australia. And I think today that catch-up is happening. So it's a bit like falling behind in the first innings and, trying to make up in the second. But certainly today, for me, the progress of the bilateral relationship, the ability to work together at a regional and global level, and the interest in shaping really the evolution of the world order, I think these are different facets of the relationship that we're talking about today. So it is for me very much a priority, which is why I'm here a second time. So once again, really thank you, Michael, for putting this together. And I look forward to the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jai, for those opening remarks. Thank you for having a conversation with me now and taking some questions from the audience in the room. I want to start at the global level, and then I want to come back to the bilateral relationship that you spoke about. You mentioned the 3 Cs, COVID, conflict, and climate change. Let me ask you about the second C, the conflict in Ukraine. A few days ago, President Volodymyr Zelensky was on this very stage, albeit by video link. Let me begin by asking, what have you made as an observer of individuals and politics and diplomats and leaders? What have you made of his wartime leadership over the past 8 months, I guess starting with that critical first weekend after the invasion when he knocked back an offer of safe passage out of Ukraine with that memorable phrase, "I don't need a ride, I need ammunition." What have you made of Zelensky as a president?
You know, in any situation, you're partly shaped by your impressions which are inherited or which pre-exist. And the only time I've seen him up close was actually at Glasgow on the sidelines of the COP26, when he and Prime Minister Modi had a very interesting discussion about a range of issues, including business cooperation, investments, trade. What could Ukraine do to build up its relationship with India, because it wasn't really as substantive as it could be. That was my first impression. I must also confess I've really not focused that much on the individual leaderships of different countries in that part of the world, even though I'm very familiar with that part of the world, largely because we've never had a crisis, or we've never had the stakes out there to be that intensively engaged. Having said that, I think a lot of what are the perceptions of the world have been shaped by obviously the events which have happened. For us, from an Indian perspective, our particular challenge was that we had 20,000 students in Ukraine. They were caught in the middle of the conflict. Most of them studied in eastern Ukraine, and extricating them required not just diplomacy in the normal sense, but actually having Prime Minister Modi call up Zelensky, call up Putin, engage me talking to Kuleba and to Lavrov and at various other levels. So I think there's a kind of a cumulative picture out here, and certainly our expectation would be that he's somebody we will continue to be engaged with. In fact, Prime Minister Modi spoke to him last week. In what we believe is the need to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue, because we honestly don't think this conflict is helping anybody at all.
As an analyst, how do you think the war in Ukraine is altering the balance of power in the world? A lot of people say that it is exposing authoritarian states as brittle and weaker than we thought they were previously. What would you say?
It's a bit like that French Revolution question which was asked of Zhou Enlai. I really honestly think it's a bit early in the day to reach very strong conclusions. I mean, this is a conflict which has gone in many ways in unanticipated directions. So if your first 6 months were not exactly predictable, I'm not sure I'd be in a hurry to reach a conclusion right now. And that's not a dodge. It's a genuine, I would say, withholding of judgment, because I don't think anybody serious right now can quite predict where this conflict is going.
We've seen dreadful images out of Ukraine over the last 24 hours. Can I invite you to comment on those missile strikes?
Look, we actually, like many other countries, we issued a statement yesterday on that, and we really think that targeting infrastructure and causing civilian deaths is in in any part of the world, anywhere. I mean, obviously, here you're talking specifically about Ukraine. I mean, this is not something that is acceptable. And I think our effort has been to keep pressing for a return to diplomacy and dialogue.
Speaking of diplomacy, in President Zelensky's remarks to the Institute, I asked him, what would you like Australia to do for Ukraine? And he asked that Australia use its influence at the United Nations to convince as many countries as possible to vote later this week for a resolution in the General Assembly condemning Russia's annexation, alleged annexation of 4 Ukrainian territories. Can you tell us how India will vote in that vote?
You know, I was asked this question yesterday at a press conference, so I have to give you the same reply.
You can give us a different one if you want to reveal more information.
Well, I could give you a different one with the same message, which is normally, nobody puts their vote out, the decision to vote out in front. I mean, you take the call when you have to. We continue to be guided by the need, because look, you have to understand something. A large part of the world today is hurting because of this conflict. It's hurting because their daily lives are impacted in a very, very damaging manner. And these countries with whom we identify ourselves, most of these are countries of the global south, they are actually feeling frustrated because they feel that their problems are being neglected. They're not being recognized by the global debates. And that for them, some kind of a speedy remedy to the challenges that they face in terms of energy security, food security, those are really very, very pressing challenges. If as someone who talks to a lot of my peers and engages many of them personally, and I've just come out of a UN General Assembly where I met close to about 100 foreign ministers. I can tell you the large body of opinion out there is to try to find a way of bringing this conflict to a speedy end and getting back to the negotiating table. And I think it's important that that sentiment should be factored in. And that it's understandable or perhaps to be expected that different countries in different regions would pursue their priorities and their approaches to this conflict. But if it is pursued in a manner in which a big part of the world, if I can use a metaphor, in a way you can look at it as an East-West conflict, but it has a North-South dimension to it. And I think if the South feels increasingly that the North is tone deaf, that that their suffering, their anxieties are not being addressed, I think that's something which will create a new set of problems, and we can sense that very strongly.
Let me change tack and ask you about China, if I may. As you know well, for 2 years, Beijing had Canberra in the diplomatic deep freeze. And since the new Australian government took office in May, lines of communication have been reopening in different ways. It did seem to me that communications were never interrupted to quite the same degree between Beijing and Delhi, even in your most difficult periods when there were bloody clashes between your two militaries. Can you give us, I know you're very diplomatic, but given that Australia is going through a transition period in our relationship with China, what would be your advice to Australia about how you re-establish a stable, productive relationship with a country that is so different from our own?
I am, especially after I became foreign minister, I'm very careful about giving advice. I'm even more careful about giving advice publicly. What I can share with you is that we've had 2.5 very difficult years in our relationship with China, which has included the first bloodshed we've had on the border after 40 years. And where we actually lost 20 soldiers. But my endeavor has been to keep the communication lines going. In fact, the morning after that, I called up my counterpart Wang Yi and urged him to ensure that there are no escalatory moves or complicating moves on the Chinese side. So for me, diplomacy is about communication. It's not just in relationship to China, even in relationship to your earlier set of comments about Ukraine. If diplomats do not communicate with each other, then what kind of diplomacy do they do? So I really feel, shutting down, talking, burning bridges, and I say this as a general principle. I would not, recommend it to anybody. There can be very testing times. I mean, we have another neighbor with whom we have a very difficult relationship. But, at the end of the day, countries have to deal with each other, and you have to find some way of keeping that going.
Let me ask you about India's relationship with the United States. Mm-hmm. In the past few years, the US has overtaken China, I think, as India's biggest trading partner. There have been a number of steps that have been taken, even in recent years, with intelligence sharing and so on. What sort of changes have you noticed in the relationship since President Biden was elected? How has it changed in different ways as Biden came in?
Well, the India-US relationship started changing, I would say, from Clinton's second term. Mm-hmm. Clinton came to India in 2000, literally the last year of his presidency. He sort of started something moving. Then really George W. Bush, I think, did the big moves thereafter. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, you had 5 American presidents, Clinton, Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden. Can't think of 5 people more different from each other, mm-hmm. Who have disagreed amongst themselves on a whole lot of issues at home and abroad, but who've actually been singularly consistent in the manner in which they have sought to engage India and to enhance our relationship. So, when you look at that kind of consistency, you realize that in many ways this is deeper than the politics of the day. Mm-hmm. That this is something which is structural, where there is actually a kind of an establishment consensus, if you would, because remember, they've alternated mm-hmm. Politically as well. So now, in the case of President Biden, because he's been around for a long time, I've been around a long time, and I can say here's someone who's been around very much longer. He's actually been involved in the growth of the relationship at different points of time. Mm-hmm. I remember going to see him along with my boss in 2005. At that time, I think, if I remember right, he was the ranking minority member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Dick Lugar was the chairman, and seeking his support for the nuclear deal. So he's known this relationship, or he's seen the evolution of this relationship, and as vice president, when Prime Minister Modi came to the US in 2014. I was the ambassador then. He was vice president, and he was strongly supportive of what we were trying to do. But there's a larger point, I think, about the Biden administration. In one way, it's an extraordinarily experienced administration. If you look at the Secretary of State, the NSA, the Director CIA, the DNI, even the Secretary of Defense. I mean, these are people who work multiple administrations, know the world. They're not new on the job. I mean, they really put it together. You're really looking at 100+ years of experience out there. Secondly, collectively, I think this is an administration which is very determined to get along with the world, which is willing to make the adjustments in many ways to find, maintain, and develop partners. So I do not mean it in any way as disrespect. It's not easy if you're the most powerful country in the world to be necessarily sensitive and necessarily adjusting. To me, the big change, and one of the reasons in my opening remark, I said that, the Quad is working well because the pillars of the Quad are all well developed and are working well. But I think one other reason the Quad is working well is actually the United States is showing the flexibility and the understanding to make the Quad work well. And this is a big evolution, to my mind, really, in America's approach to world politics.
How can we make the Quad work better? What else would you like to see the Quad do?
Right now, I don't see any big obstacles. But to my mind, in a way, the Quad's novel. I mean, it's novel in the sense that typically, the post-45 world has the post-45 world, which you know better, which we have less experience of. It's a world of treaties and alliances and sort of legalistically underpinned commitments. You actually have a grouping very easy. There's no agreement. There's no secretariat. These are practices. We make it up as we go along. So it's just a much more loose-limbed way of an open-minded way of actually working together, which, by the way, suits us when I think today suits the other three countries as well. So for me, it's not like we have a barrier and impediment. What we probably would need to do is to keep, a bit like your phone, need to keep pressing the refresh button and getting new ideas and, how do you keep growing the agenda? My sense is I've dealt with Quad this time around both as Foreign Secretary, as the Permanent Secretary before, now as the Minister. I've seen it now grow to the summit level. But the more we work together, the more we will find areas for cooperation. This is actually a kind of exploring and doing at the same time.
All right, let me come to the bilateral relationship. When I interviewed you 2 years ago, you said to me that if there is one relationship I take great satisfaction in, it's the India-Australia relationship. As you mentioned, since the change of government, there have been a whole string of Indian ministers visit Australia. You were making interesting comments earlier about how the US-India relationship is changing for structural reasons as much as personal reasons. You talked about an establishment consensus. Is that how you'd characterise the changes in the India-Australia relationship too? Or to ask the question a different way, has it changed since the change of government, change of Prime Minister, change of Foreign Minister? How much of this is personal and how much is structural?
I am increasingly getting the impression that it's structural here too, because quite honestly, we are just as comfortable with this government as we were with the previous one. And bear in mind, because again, if I were to pick an inflection point, in the case of the US, I took Clinton and then Bush as the two inflection points. I think here it was really that Tony Abbott-Modi exchange of visits in 2014 which really set the ball rolling. And since then, we've had multiple prime ministers in Australia. But I think all of them showed a commendable level of interest in growing the relationship. And my own involvement at a political level is, pre your election and post your election. And I would say, and actually it so happened that for your current government, the first day on the job was to spend time with us in Tokyo, because we had a Quad summit. So I frankly think it's been a very, very smooth transition. I see just as much interest, same enthusiasm. Whatever was worked out in the last days of the previous government, the trade stuff, the financial stuff is moving along. I think there are a lot of new ideas on the table which will get picked up. I think particularly education offers a lot of possibilities. Possibilities not just at this end, actually to internationalize and modernize the Indian education system as well through greater global exposure. So I think I'd be fairly confident saying that this has now become structural here.
What about the relationship between the leaders? Mr. Modi and Mr. Morrison famously had a good relationship. I don't know whether Albo's such a deft hand with the curry or not, but what have you noticed in that, especially in that first Quad meeting between Mr. Albanese and Mr. Modi?
No, I thought that they got along quite visibly well, and I think some of that my recollection of that meeting was I think your Prime Minister, spoke about his personal visits to India. And I think there was some interesting stuff he said there which caught our attention in a good way. So I'm pretty confident that this relationship is going to go well. They've done a virtual meeting as well after that. So I think the chemistry will be good.
Let me ask you about AUKUS, which is speaking of innovations, is a huge innovation in Australian foreign policy, especially the commitment to acquire a fleet of nuclear-propelled submarines. I understand from the interviews you gave yesterday that India supported the recent IAEA assessment that the plan doesn't represent a proliferation risk. Can I ask you, is that the case? Are you comfortable with it from that point of view? But also, what do you make of AUKUS as a nuclear power yourself? How would the acquisition of this kind of capability change India's perception of Australia as a strategic actor, as a strategically capable actor?
Look, these are capability decisions and, in a sense, strategic calls are for the countries concerned to make. It's not reasonable, and frankly, it's not sometimes even fair for another country, to pass judgments on it when you don't have necessarily a full and informed picture of the whole issue. So we have been quite prudent about voicing our view on the decisions which you took, and that's understandable. My point, which I made yesterday to your press, was that the matter did come up. I think there was some press speculation on this matter. The matter did come up at the IAEA General Conference. We took the position, because I can speak for myself here. we took the position that we would respect the judgment of the IAEA Director General, Rafael Grossi, which many of us know him. I know him personally. We have a great deal of regard for his objectivity and his professionalism. And therefore, that's it. Now, it would appear that, this sense was shared by a number of other countries, and that's really what happened out there.
All right. Dealt with that one very deftly, I thought. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a few minutes for questions from the audience, and then I might come back with one more perhaps for the Minister. But let me go to the audience now and see. I see Penny Wensley, who is a Lowy Institute board member, but also a former Australian High Commissioner to India. I'll ask the questioners to wait for the microphone and then put their question to the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, and Minister, thank you. I was very interested to watch your address to the UN General Assembly just a couple of weeks ago, and you referred to reformed multilateralism, and you acknowledged that reform of the Security Council was at the core of that, but that's a really hard nut to crack. How, in fact, do you think India can advance its purposeful agenda for reformed multilateralism? And I ask you this against the background of your strong commitment to diplomacy and paying more attention to diplomacy, but also as a former ambassador to the UN and committed multilateralist. I think if India can help to lead the way on this, then it would be a very good thing in the current circumstances globally.
Well, I agree with you that it's a hard nut, but hard nuts can be cracked. If I look back and say, well, this one is too difficult, I wouldn't be doing too much in my life. I mean, life has been a set of challenges, particularly for a country like India. So I would not let the difficulties of that challenge deter me or discourage me. In fact, I'd put it the other way around. Ask yourself, put India aside for a moment. Look, there are whole continents today which actually feel that the Security Council processes do not take into account their interests. I mean, I spoke earlier about Ukraine and a sense in the global south that their problems of food and fuel and fertilizer are being just brushed aside. And frankly, if you go to a UN General Assembly and talk to countries, there are countries in Africa and Latin America and the small island states, quite apart from Asia and India, who feel very, very strongly that this is not their UN in a way. And I think that's hugely damaging to the UN. So one of the developments this time, in fact, has been a very explicit recognition by President Biden of the need to actually reform the UN, which is not a small development. But we need to because we all know why reform has been blocked for so many years. So I think it's important to keep up the pressure. There is global sentiment out there. We completely understand. I mean, this is not something which is going to be done easily and necessarily speedily. But it's something which has to be done finally. Otherwise, we will end up, frankly, with an increasingly irrelevant United Nations.
Thank you. Let me call on Peter Harcher from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age.
Thank you, Dr. Jaishankar. You used the metric of ministerial visits earlier as an indicator of the intensity of the relationship, which is a good input into relationships. What metric would you want to see in terms of outputs over, say, the next 5 years? What would you like to see the Australia-India relationship achieve specifically over, say, the next 5 years?
I think one part of me would like to see better numbers, better trade numbers, better investment numbers, better tourist numbers, better student numbers. One part of me would definitely like to see better chemistry, comfort, that on the difficult problems of the world and difficult problems that we individually face, we have a better ability to work together. And for me, chemistry is something which is, and not just leader level chemistry, sometimes institutional chemistry. Quite honestly, if I were to look back over the last 6-7 years and think of my Australian counterparts and reflect on how much more openly we talk today to each other, that's to me a big change, because that at the end of the day is a very, very important indicator of how good or not good your relationship is. Perhaps in some senses, the ambition, the scale of the impact that we make. What it really means is you give me better trade, better investment, a stronger Quad, deeper defense. All these are examples of what how I would measure progress.
Thank you. I see Senator Simon Birmingham, the Shadow Foreign Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to Lowy for hosting this event. Dr. Jaishankar, thank you very much for the commitment you have shown to the Australia-India relationship, the manner in which you have helped to build it, and the seamless way in which you have dealt with the changes of leadership, ministers and governments in our country through that time. You spoke of the 3 C's in challenges that you identified, and it's nice to think about, even though they're all challenging ones, but nice to think about a different set of 3 C's than the ones that culturally often are highlighted in the Australia-India relationship. Can I take you to the C that perhaps hasn't been dealt with in the remarks tonight? Michael and others have touched on the conflict one. COVID, we hope we are putting behind us and moving beyond, but climate change remains a very significant one for global dialogue moving forward. What do you see Australia and other nations like Australia needing to do and not to do in terms of helping to ensure that together we can tackle a challenge like climate change, and to help India be able to fulfil your ambitions and missions in growth, but also to decarbonise through that growth agenda?
It's now close to a year since we had COP26. We are moving to COP27 next month. If you look back at this year, I think pretty much across the world, the sense of alarm about climate events and climate emergencies has increased very sharply. The parts of the world which have had much more rain than they ever had, and I think I'm probably sitting in one right now. But there are parts of the world where you had, Europe, for example, had a complete shortfall of rain. It was a very hot summer. You were seeing, you're seeing floods, you're seeing heat waves, you're seeing, mountainous events, coastal events. So there are 2 issues here. One, how serious are we about pursuing our commitments? And at the heart of the issue is really the willingness really to deploy the finance necessary for it. The COPs have been kind of repetitive cycling, Groundhog Day conversations. Every COP is the same. There's an argument. How serious are you? How much money are you willing to put up? Where does it take us? We have it again the next COP. There are solutions. After all, it's not like the world can't find money. I mean, the world's, I was in the UN and somebody pointed out to me that 100 billion was the commitment made in Paris for climate change per year. The commitment made for the Ukraine conflict is close to $100 billion. So it's a question of whether we really see it as existential. Are we really willing to act on it? And to say that, the money will come from the private sector. Look, the private sector is not going to lead. Governments have to lead. Multilateral institutions have to lead. I don't, this is not a failure of imagination. It's actually an unwillingness to really, to put the necessary resources out there. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not completely convinced the people who say this is existential believe that. So we really think that it's important to step up. On India's part, I mean, what we have done is we've said, look, we are prepared to do what it takes in India because climate change is not something which is we can keep away through negotiation. I mean, it's going to happen anyway. So you look at the changes in India in terms of our renewable programs, energy efficiency programs, the smart city programs, the lifestyle adjustment campaigns which we've been leading. We will do our part in terms of climate action, but we do believe that there is a climate justice part to it. There are countries who may not have the capabilities and resources that we have, and that they do deserve more than a helping hand. I would say it's important for the global debates today not to be consumed by any single issue, however important those issues are. We can't run the world as a one agenda world.
I'm going to take the last question, Minister, and change tack one more time. You mentioned at the UN recently you met, I think, with 100 foreign ministers from around the world.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, when you look at those foreign ministers, or if you want to be diplomatic, look at other foreign ministers you've observed in the past or leaders, is there one individual that you've encountered that you really admired as a professional, as a minister or a diplomat, in his or her ability to prosecute their country's interests and push their values? Is there someone that really you learned a lot from?
That one I have to dodge, because if I said that, I will lose a lot of friends. What
about someone from history then?
I've actually made some discoveries, I must tell you. In my country, typically, and I guess in yours too, our system of politics, you have politicians who become ministers. And so mostly foreign ministers are people who spend their entire life in politics. So I'm an exception in a way in mind. There's been one other diplomat who's been a foreign minister. When I became foreign minister, I actually discovered a very large number of foreign ministers are actually diplomats, were diplomats who got kind of promoted progressively. And this is the tradition in their countries. And, when you work with people, frankly, each one of them, there's something you kind of take away. I know that sounds terribly diplomatic, but actually, I give you, it's a bit like cricket, okay? You bowl at anybody. There's nobody you play against from whom you don't have, you are studying them all the time, saying, okay, this is the weakness, this is the strength. Don't bowl outside the off stump to this guy. So it's a bit like that. You keep assessing, you keep probing, you keep learning. There are people with whom I'd take chances. There are people with whom I wouldn't.
So there's not a Steve Waugh of diplomacy that you want to nominate tonight?
Not publicly, no.
Okay, all right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is a limited overs match tonight, so we're going to draw a line under it. I think he had a pretty good innings at the Lowy Institute tonight. I did my best to bowl up a few googlies and even the odd doosra, but he just pretty effortlessly, I think, hit them to the boundary. I did hear him commit at the beginning to a co-authored book between Jaishankar and me on cricket and diplomacy, so I think I have witnesses. for that point. I think you made some important points tonight, and for me, the one that I took away was your conclusion that the warming and the thickening of relations between Australia and India is now structural, that it builds on the work of individual ministers and diplomats, but it goes beyond that. And I think that's something I hope is the case. I recall the 2021 ORF survey, which found that 2/3 of young Indians trust Australia, and the Lowy Institute survey in the same year that found a very similar number of Australians trust India. And that's a very good basis from which to work. You've told me before how satisfied you are with the bilateral relationship, and by visiting twice in a year and spending 2 weeks in Australasia, you're really walking the walk. We always have to look for new ways of thickening the relationship. We hope that Mr. Modi will be visiting Australia next year for the Quad Leaders meeting. And of course, if we wanted a practical way of thickening it, then getting Mr. Modi on the Lowy Institute stage, I think would be an important one. So we can take that away as a joint exercise. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been, I think, a real treat to have so much time with the Minister tonight. So please join me in thanking His Excellency, Dr. Subramanian Jaishankar. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, namaste and welcome to all the distinguished guests at the Institute, both those here in our beautiful headquarters at 31 Bligh Street and those joining us online for this special event and address and a conversation with India's Minister of External Affairs, Dr. Subramanian Jaishankar. I'm Michael Fullilove, the Executive Director of the Lowy Institute. Let me begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are gathered, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great personal pleasure to host my friend Dr. Jaishankar at the Institute this evening. He and I were introduced more than a decade ago by his son Dhruva, who was a colleague of mine at the Brookings Institution in Washington, DC in the late noughties. And Dhruva has been a non-resident fellow here at the Institute for some years. He's doing a fabulous job in Washington, of course, running ORF America. This year, Jai, I couldn't be at the Raisina dialogue, but Samir Saran and Dhruva were kind enough to invite me to participate in Raisina DC at a panel with Michelle Flournoy and Senator Bill Haggerty and Meera Raphoopa from the National Security Council that was beamed into Raisina, and I was grateful for that courtesy. Ladies and gentlemen, I've known and admired Jai for more than a decade, and in that period I've called on him in Beijing and Washington, where he was representing the Republic of India. I've called on him in Delhi when he was heading up India's Foreign Service as Foreign Secretary, and now, of course, we're delighted to host him as the Minister. He spoke actually virtually at the Institute in 2020 during the pandemic. And last year, he was kind enough to invite me to give the Atal Bihari Vajpayee lecture, which was a great honour. Dr. Jaishankar and I are both great cricket fans, and today he's had a big day. He went up in a chopper, he inspected a lot of ADF assets, and he was at the SCG, where he was personally escorted by Steve Waugh. So let me say, Jai, I am fully aware that I'm playing second fiddle today. But I have always thought that the game of cricket is a lot like the great game of foreign affairs. Things are opaque in cricket as in diplomacy. Sometimes a draw is actually a win. The weather conditions and the state of the pitch are critical. The ball swings in the air and it jumps off the pitch. Sometimes it flies at your head. And in foreign policy too, the decision-making environment is fast and fluid. And that's certainly the case today. It seems to me the relationship between New Delhi and Canberra, in a way, has the character of a long Steve Waugh innings, if you'll allow me, Minister. We started off slowly, we dug in, we got our eye in, but now that we've settled in, We're taking our shots and the runs are flowing. I might say I wish they had been flowing a little more in Australia's direction during the recent T20 series. Australia has many things that bind us together. We have deep historical and personal connections. There is a brilliant and talented Indian diaspora in this country. But increasingly, we also have a shared view of the world. Through organisations such as the Quad, Australia and India are demonstrating the shared conviction that all countries should have the right to make their own way in the world.